Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku held the power of the Black Lantern Ring. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint was a choking cocktail of dust, ozone, and the metallic tang of blood. It was a cathedral of manufactured disasters, and at its heart, a god was bleeding. All Might, the symbol of peace, the pillar upon which their entire society rested, was not smiling. Not really. The iconic grin was plastered on his face, a rictus of sheer, indomitable will, but it didn't reach his eyes. The shadows pooling in their sunken depths told a story of pain and encroaching limits. His costume, a vibrant testament to hope, was torn and stained, the brilliant blue muted by grime, the proud red streaked with his own blood. Before him stood the antithesis of everything he was. The Nomu. It wasn't a person, not anymore. It was a grotesque monument to malice, a hulking behemoth of scar tissue, exposed brain, and unnaturally swollen muscle. Its beak-like mouth was agape, its eyes vacant and staring. It didn't feel pain or fear or fatigue. It was a living battering ram, purpose-built with a singular, horrifying function, to kill All Might. And it was succeeding. Izuku Midoriya felt that truth like a shard of ice in his gut. He stood on the precipice of the central plaza alongside Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki, having arrived just moments before. His mind, a frantic whirlwind of analysis and hero worship, was screaming. He saw the way All Might favored his left side, the subtle tremor in his fist after landing a blow, the way the steam rising from his body was becoming thicker, more desperate. He was on a timer, and the sand was running out. He's being pushed back, Izuku whispered, the words catching in his throat. It was a blasphemy he never thought he'd utter. Shut up, DKU. Bakugo snarled, his hands already crackling with miniature explosions. His crimson eyes were locked on the monster, blazing with a furious, proprietary rage. This was his idol being desecrated, his goal being tarnished. All Might doesn't get pushed back. We're here now. We're gonna fry this ugly bastard. Todoroki, ever the stoic observer, was more pragmatic. A sheet of frost was already creeping from his right foot, a silent promise of the power he held in reserve. His movements are slower. The creature's shock absorption is negating most of the kinetic force from his punches. He's wasting stamina. His gaze was cold, analytical, but Izuku could see the flicker of disbelief in his heterochromatic eyes. This was a force of nature meeting an immovable object, and the force of nature was tiring. The Nomu let out a bird-like shriek and charged. It was less a run and more a controlled avalanche of muscle. All Might met it head-on, their collision shaking the very foundations of the dome. A shockwave of pressurized air blasted outwards, kicking up a storm of debris. I am the symbol of peace. All Might roared, his voice straining but still booming with authority. And I will not be defeated by a mindless puppet. He drove his fist into the Nomu's gut. The sound was like a wrecking ball hitting a concrete wall. The creature's flesh rippled, absorbing the blow with a sickening gelatinous squelch. In return, one of its massive, four-fingered hands clamped around All Might's side, the side already weakened by his old injury. A choked gasp escaped the hero's lips. For a split second, the muscle-bound form deflated, the heroic visage shrinking into the gaunt, skeletal frame of Toshinori Yagi before puffing back out with a heroic effort. Izuku's blood ran cold. He's at his limit, that was it. That was the thought that broke the dam of his heroic optimism. All his life, he had believed in All Might. That belief was a fundamental law of his personal universe, as certain as gravity. Now, he was watching that law crumble. The man in charge, the villain with hands clasped all over his body, Tamura Shigaraki, let out a dry, scratchy cackle. You see? You see? He's not a god. He's just a man. And he's getting weaker. Your final boss is getting nerfed in real time. He scratched furiously at his neck, flakes of dry skin falling like snow. Nomu, break him. The Nomu complied. It squeezed. All Might roared, a sound of pure agony that he tried to morph into a battle cry. He hammered at the creature's arm with his free fist, but his blows were losing their devastating power. They were becoming desperate, ragged. It was in that moment that the world changed for Izuku Midoriya. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a feeling. A sensation that bloomed in the core of his being, cold and absolute. It was the feeling of watching a star die. It was the mathematical certainty of a final, irreversible equation clicking into place. He's going to die. The thought wasn't panicked. It wasn't scared. It was a profound, hollow, and utterly certain truth. The vibrant chaos of the battle faded into a muted hum. The brilliant colors of Bakugo's explosions and Todoroki's eyes seemed to desaturate, bleeding into a universal gray. The air grew still. The frantic beat of his own heart slowed to a funereal dirge. He was seeing the end. Not just of a fight, or of a man, but of an era. The end of hope. The end of the smile that had saved 1,000,000 people, including him. In that instant, Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had been told his entire life that he was a void, a zero, an absence of power, felt a deep, resonant connection to the concept of finality itself. He was staring into the abyss, and for the first time, something in the abyss was staring back. This spike of pure, existential dread, this perfect, undiluted understanding of an imminent and absolute end, shot out from him like a beacon. It was a silent scream in a frequency no living thing could hear, but death could. Above the shattered glass of the dome, something tore through the sky. It wasn't a bird or a plane. It was a sliver of perfect darkness, a moving hole in reality that drank the light around it. It descended with unnatural speed, not falling but seeking. It ignored the raw, incandescent power of all might. It bypassed the seething, life-filled rage of Bakugo. It paid no mind to the balanced fire and ice of Todoroki. It shot past the monstrous, warped life of the Nomu and the hateful, decaying presence of Shigaraki. It had a singular, undeniable target. Izuku saw it a second before it hit. A black speck growing at an impossible rate. He had no time to even flinch before it slammed into him. There was no impact, no force, just a cold that defied all logic. It attached itself to the middle finger of his right hand. The cold was absolute. It wasn't the crisp chill of Todoroki's ice. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of deep space, the cold of a universe that had forgotten warmth. It burned. It seared through his glove, his skin, his flesh, his bone, lancing up his arm in a network of black, frozen veins. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his hand. The world of sound and color rushed back in, 10 times harsher than before. DKU! What the hell's wrong with you? Bakugo yelled, momentarily distracted. Izuku couldn't answer. He stared at his hand. A simple, elegant ring, wrought from a material that seemed to absorb all light, now sat immovably on his finger. At its center was a simple, stark symbol, a triangle, pointed down, with a line bisecting it from the top point to the center of the base. It felt ancient, heavy, and dead, and then it spoke, not to his ears, but inside his skull. The voice wasn't a voice. It was a concept. A cold, flat, empty thought that was not his own. It was the sound of a tomb sealing shut. Izuku Midoriya of Earth. The words were devoid of inflection, of emotion, of anything resembling life. They were a statement of fact from a power that dealt only in facts. You feel the end approach. You know the great quiet. You belong to us. His mind reeled. Us? What? Get out of my head! The Nomu shrieked again, a triumphant sound this time. It had lifted All Might off the ground. The symbol of peace was struggling, his feet kicking uselessly. The monster was preparing to apply the final, bone-shattering pressure. All Might! Izuku screamed, his own voice sounding distant. The ring in his mind responded to the spike of desperation, not with comfort, but with a command. A single, hollow word that echoed in the silent chambers of his soul. Rise. What happened next was not a choice. It was a reflex, as instinctual as flinching from a flame. His terror for All Might, his horror at the foreign presence in his mind, his desperate need to do something, it all coalesced into a single, frantic gesture. He threw his right hand forward. Not to punch. Not to summon one for all. It was a gesture of pleading. Stop. Please. Somebody. Anybody. Stop it. The command rise found its purchase. It wasn't directed at the living. Across the plaza, scattered amongst the rocks and debris, lay the bodies of the low-level villains All Might and Aizawa had dispatched in the first minutes of the attack. They were unconscious, broken, some likely dead from the force of the hero's counterattack. They were forgotten footnotes in the grander battle, but the ring did not forget. A low hum filled the air, a bass note that vibrated in Izuku's teeth. From the black ring on his finger, a plume of inky, smoke-like energy erupted, not dispersing but flowing, a river of night that slithered across the ground. It ignored the living, seeking out the fallen. The villains began to twitch. A man with a lizard-like quirk, his jaw broken and bent at an unnatural angle, spasmed. A black tendril of energy sank into his chest, and with a sickening crack, his jaw snapped back into place. A woman with 4 arms, all of them twisted behind her back, was enveloped in the smoke. Her limbs untwisted with a series of wet, popping sounds. One by one they got up. Their movements were jerky, inhuman, like marionettes yanked by an unskilled puppeteer. Their heads lolled on their necks. The black, smoky energy clung to them like a shroud, and their eyes were gone. In their place, glowing with a dead, white light, was the same symbol that adorned Izuku's ring. They were no longer people. They were puppets. Things. Shigaraki, who had been reveling in his imminent victory, froze. His scratching stopped. What is this? Kurojiri, is this you? The Warp Gate villain materialized at his side, his yellow eyes wide with confusion. No, Tamara Shigaraki. This is not my doing. This is something else. Bakugo stared, his explosion sputtering out in his palms. What the hell is that, Deku? Izuku couldn't answer. His arm was still outstretched, trembling violently. He felt a connection to these things. A faint, horrifying tug in his mind for each one, like strings leading back to his fingers. He could feel their emptiness, their coldness. It was an extension of the cold in his own arm. He wanted to vomit. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tear the ring from his finger, even if it took the finger with it. But he couldn't. Because the Nomu was still crushing his hero. All Might's struggles were weakening. His frantic gaze fell upon the scene below, upon the reanimated villains, and then upon his successor, who stood at the center of this horrifying new development. His eyes widened in disbelief and a new kind of terror. Young Midoriya, what have you done? The instinct to save overrode the horror. The thought was a raw, primal scream in Izuku's mind, directed at the monster. Get it away from him! Stop it! The ring interpreted the command. The reanimated army of a dozen villains turned as one. Their heads swiveled with a synchronized, mechanical click, their glowing white eyes fixing on the Nomu. They didn't have strategies. They didn't have fear. They had only their directive. They charged. It was a horrifying spectacle. They ran with a stumbling, unnatural gait, limbs flailing. The lizard man scrambled on all fours, hissing black smoke. The 4-armed woman galloped forward, her arms windmilling. They swarmed the Nomu like ants on a beetle. The Nomu, a being of immense power, was momentarily confused. It was designed to fight one powerhouse, not a dozen frenzied, unnatural opponents. It swatted one away, sending the body tumbling through the air with a crunch of bone, but the puppet felt no pain. It just got back up, a broken arm dangling uselessly, and charged again. They clawed at its legs, bit at its flesh, and threw their bodies at it with reckless, suicidal abandon. They were a tide of animated meat, and their purpose was singular, to occupy the Nomu. The monster, overwhelmed by the sheer, unthinking mass of bodies, loosened its grip on All Might. The hero fell to his knees, gasping, the colossal form of his muscular body flickering violently. He coughed, a spray of blood speckling the ground. You, cheater! Shigaraki shrieked, his voice cracking with rage and a hint of fear. He was scratching his neck raw. Using a cheat code. That's not fair. Nomu, kill them! Kill all of them. Then kill All Might. The Nomu roared and began to fight back in earnest. It tore one of the puppets in half, black energy bleeding from the wound instead of blood. It smashed another into a pulp against the ground. But for every one it destroyed, 2 more would clamber onto its back, clawing at its exposed brain. They were relentless. They were an annoyance, but a critically effective one. Now's our chance, Todoroki said, his voice sharp, cutting through the horrified stupor. He slammed his right foot down. A massive wave of ice surged forward, encasing the Nomu's lower body and the swarm of puppets along with it, freezing them all in a grotesque tableau. Bakugo, never one to be outdone, let out a war cry. I don't know what the hell you did, you damn nerd, but don't just stand there. He launched himself into the air with his explosions, aiming for the Noma's head. AP shot! The focused blast struck the Noma's temple. The creature howled, staggering, its head smoking. Izuku watched, frozen. His puppets, his army of the dead, were trapped in the ice, still struggling feebly. He felt their mindless, futile efforts as a faint buzzing in the back of his mind. He looked at his hand, the black ring feeling like a brand on his soul. What did I do? What is this? The ground shook as the main entrance to the USJ was blown inwards. The cavalry had arrived. Ida had succeeded. Pro-heroes, Snipe, Cementos, Ectoplasm, and at their lead, Principal Nizu, streamed into the facility. The game was up. It's over, Tamura Shigaraki, Kurojiri said, his form wavering. We must retreat. Shigaraki let out a sound of pure, frustrated fury. No! Not yet! I almost had him. He was almost broken. But he saw the arriving heroes, the still struggling Nomu, and the inexplicable army of zombies. With a final, hate-filled glare at All Might, and a confused, fearful glance at Izuku, he relented. Fine. We'll go. But we'll be back. Kurojiri enveloped them both in his swirling black mist, and in an instant they were gone. With its masters gone, the Nomu stood dumbly, frozen from the waist down, still trying to peel the reanimated corpses from its body. The immediate threat was over. And as the adrenaline of survival began to fade, the full, crushing weight of what had just happened slammed into Izuku. The connection snapped. The faint buzzing in his mind ceased. The cold strings leading to his puppets dissolved. Across the plaza, the glowing white symbols in the eyes of his reanimated villains flickered and died. The black, smoky energy holding them together evaporated into nothingness. With the unholy power gone, they simply collapsed. The ones trapped in the ice went limp. The one the Nomu had torn in half fell into two distinct, gruesome pieces. The one smashed against the ground was now just a bloody smear. They were just bodies again. Broken, dead things lying in a hero's training ground. Izuku stared at the carnage he had wrought. He looked at the collapsed villains, at the horrified faces of the newly arrived pro-heroes, at Bakugo and Todoroki who were staring at him with a mixture of awe and revulsion. He looked at his right hand, at the sleek, black ring fused to his finger. It was cold. So cold. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, the same posture as his fallen idol. The world swam, a dizzying vortex of gray and black. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him completely was All Might. The symbol of peace had pushed himself to his feet. He was bleeding, exhausted, and barely holding his form together. But he wasn't looking at the defeated Nomu. He wasn't looking at the spot where the villains had vanished. He was staring, with an expression of profound, soul-deep shock and absolute terror, not at any monster, but at his own successor. He was staring at the trembling, wide-eyed boy who, in a desperate bid to save a life, had just commanded the dead. The first sensation was a dull, rhythmic throbbing at the base of his skull. It was a familiar ache, the hangover of pushing one for all past its breaking point. The second sensation was the clean, antiseptic smell of Recovery Girl's office, a scent so intrinsically linked with his UA experience it was almost comforting. The third was the gentle, grandmotherly hum of the woman herself, a sound that promised safety and healing. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. The ceiling was white. The blanket covering him was soft and warm. For a blissful, fleeting microsecond, everything was normal. Then he remembered. His body went rigid. The memory didn't return in a gentle wave. It crashed down on him like a tidal wave of icy, black water. The Nomu. All Might, broken and bleeding. The cold, a cold that was more than just the temperature, lancing up his arm. The black smoke. The jerky, unnatural movements of the fallen villains. The glowing white symbols where their eyes should have been. Rise. The word echoed in his memory, a silent thunderclap that made him gasp. He shot upright, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His wild eyes darted around the infirmary. He was alone, save for Recovery Girl, who was sitting at her desk, her back to him, writing on a chart. His gaze fell to his hands. His left was fine, trembling but unmarred. His right, the black ring, was still there. It sat innocently on his middle finger, a perfect, seamless band of impossible darkness. It wasn't metal, not exactly. It was more like a solid piece of shadow, drinking the gentle light of the infirmary and giving nothing back. The triangular symbol etched into it was stark and absolute. It felt like a gravestone on his finger. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been a hallucination brought on by stress and injury. It was real. It was on him. A low, strangled sound escaped his throat. He grabbed his right wrist with his left hand and pulled. Nothing. He twisted, grunting with effort, trying to wrench the ring from his finger. The skin around it didn't even stretch. It was as if the ring wasn't on his finger, but was now a part of it, as fundamental as the bone beneath. Oh, dearie. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Recovery Girl had swiveled in her chair. Her usual kindly expression was clouded with a deep, professional concern he had never seen before. Her gaze was fixed on his hand. It won't come off, Izuku stammered, his voice hoarse. Panic was beginning to bubble in his chest, hot and acidic. I can't get it off. We know, she said, her voice soft but grave. All Might tried while you were unconscious. So did I. We even had Power Loader come in with a pair of his industrial cutters. The blade shattered. The panic turned to ice. A tool designed to cut through high-density steel had shattered against the simple ring. What is it? Izuku whispered, staring at the alien object that had grafted itself to him. Is it a quirk? Did one of the villains? We don't think so, she sighed, standing and walking over to his bedside. She didn't reach for the ring, instead placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. There was no one near you when it appeared. The security footage is confusing. One moment, there's nothing. The next, a black streak from the sky, and then, that. The door to the infirmary opened, and Izuku's breath caught. All Might stood there, but not the towering symbol of peace. It was the other one. The skeletal, gaunt form of Toshinori Yagi. His blonde hair was limp, his blue eyes were sunken into shadowed sockets, and he looked as though he had aged a century since the battle. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on his frail shoulders. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice a low, tired rasp. You're awake. Good. All Might. Are you okay? Izuku asked, his own terror momentarily forgotten in the face of his mentor's obvious pain. A faint, sad smile touched Toshinori's lips. I will be. Thanks to you. The smile vanished. But we need to talk. Principal Nizu is waiting for us. The walk to the debriefing room was silent and heavy. Izuku was acutely aware of the weight of the ring on his finger, a constant, cold pressure that seemed to radiate a palpable aura of dread. He hid his right hand in his pocket, a futile gesture. He felt like a leper hiding his sores. The room Nizu had chosen was deep in the sublevels of UA, a place Izuku didn't know existed. It was a cube of bare, gray concrete. A single metal table and 3 chairs were its only furnishings. The air was cool, still, and tasted of dust and secrets. It felt less like a debriefing room and more like a tomb. Principal Nizu was already there, sitting at the table, a cup of tea steaming between his paws. The intelligent, beady eyes of the mammal who might be a mouse or a bear or something else surveyed Izuku with an unnerving intensity. There was no trace of his usual cheerful eccentricity. This was the hyper-intelligent strategist who ran the top hero school in the country, and he was facing an unprecedented variable. Midoriya, Nizu began, his voice calm and level. Please sit. All Might, you as well. Izuku sat, placing his hands on the cold metal table. He couldn't bring himself to hide the ring anymore. He laid his right hand flat, the black band and its chilling symbol stark against his pale skin. Toshinori sat beside him, his form slumping with exhaustion. First, Nizu said, let me be clear. You are not in trouble. Your actions at the USJ, while unorthodox, directly resulted in the preservation of All Might's life and the neutralization of a major threat. For that you have our gratitude. Izuku swallowed, the praise feeling hollow and wrong. I don't know what I did, sir. That is what we are here to ascertain, Niza said, his gaze unwavering. We have reviewed all available footage. We have spoken with young Bakugo and young Todoroki. Their accounts are consistent, if colored by their own unique perspectives. But only you know what happened from the inside. So, please, young Midoriya, tell us everything. From the moment it appeared, Izuku took a shaky breath. He recounted the feeling of absolute certainty, the cold dread that All Might was about to die. He described the black streak from the sky, the searing, final cold of the ring attaching to his finger. His voice cracked as he spoke of the voice inside his head. It spoke to me, he said, looking from Niza to All Might. Not with sound. It was a thought. An idea. It said my name. It said, you feel the end approach. You know the great quiet. You belong to us. Toshinori visibly flinched, his hand clenching into a bony fist on the tabletop. And then, Izuku continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, All Might was in danger, and I just wanted to stop it, and the voice, the ring, it just said one word. Rise, and I reached out, and they just got up. He shuddered, the memory of their jerky, unnatural movements seared into his brain. I could feel them. Like I was connected to them by strings. Cold strings. Niza steepled his paws. Fascinating. A form of necromancy, triggered by an unknown artifact that seeks out, what? Proximity to death? An understanding of it? He took a thoughtful sip of his tea. His calmness was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. It was then that the whispering started. It wasn't the commanding, factual voice from before. This was quieter. A cold, insidious thought sliding into the back of his mind like a snake through grass. Flesh and fur, the new thought whispered, unbidden. It was directed at Nizu. A brief, complex chemical reaction. An impressive intellect, a fleeting spark in a dying nervous system. It will cease. The thoughts will unravel. The warmth will fade. Soon, it will be quiet. Izuku flinched, his head jerking to the side as if to shake the thought out. Young Midoriya? All Might asked, his voice laced with concern. What is it? And nothing, Izuku stammered. The ring wasn't just a conduit anymore. It was a commentator. A nihilistic philosopher living in his head. Niza continued, this power. The ability to reanimate the recently deceased. It's a power that exists outside of any known quirk classification. This is not a quirk, Midoriya. This is something else entirely. We need to understand its limits, its rules. Rules, the voice in his head mused, a cold and empty sound. There is only one rule. All things end. This construct of concrete and steel around you. It is decaying. The atoms that bind it are slowly losing their cohesion. In time, it will be dust. The planet it rests upon orbits a dying star. The star is part of a galaxy hurtling towards collision with another. The universe itself expands towards a final, frigid entropy. All of it is a long, slow fall into silence. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the heels of his palms into his temples. Stop it, he whimpered. Stop what? Toshinori leaned forward, his face etched with worry. The voice? Is it speaking to you now? Izuku nodded, trembling. It's not telling me to do anything. It's just talking. Pointing things out? The walls, he said, the walls are decaying. He said you. Izuku looked at his mentor, his eyes wide with horror. It said you're already an echo. A walking tomb. The words hung in the sterile air, monstrous and cruel. Toshinori recoiled as if struck. The statement was too close to his own secret fears, to the truth of his own wasting body. My boy, was all he could manage, and then, a new horror bloomed. As Izuku looked at his mentor, the world shimmered. The harsh lines of the room, the solid forms of Niza and All Might, they all remained, but they were now overlaid with a new layer of reality, a new sense of sight. He could see their emotions. They weren't just feelings he could infer. They were visible, tangible things. Auras of colored light that clung to them like living fire. Niza's was a dazzling, complex thing. A brilliant, blindingly white light shaped like an intricate, ever-shifting maze. It was the color of pure, cold intellect, of a billion thoughts firing at once. It was beautiful and terrifyingly alien. All Might's was heartbreaking. It was a dying star. At its core, a solid, magnificent sphere of burning gold, the color of hope, of unbreakable will, of the symbol of peace. But engulfing it, eating away at its edges, was a corona of blackest night, shot through with flickering veins of gray. It was the color of fear, of pain, of a secret kept too long, of a man watching his own legacy become something he could no longer understand. Light, the ring whispered in his mind, its voice taking on a new quality. Not hunger, but a deep, resonant desire. A craving. So much light. So much sound. A symphony of noisy, fleeting feelings, all of it craving the quiet. The new vision was overwhelming. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut again, but it didn't help. He could still see the auras, blazing behind his eyelids. He opened them again, his gaze darting around frantically. This had to be a side effect. It had to be. He focused on his own hands. He saw a faint aura around his left hand, a soft, nervous green. But his right hand, the hand with the ring, was a vortex. A brilliant, life-affirming emerald green, the color of his own fierce, desperate dream, was being swirled and pulled into a central point of absolute, light-devouring black. The two colors were at war on his very skin. The door to the debriefing room opened, and 3 students were escorted in by Aizawa, whose own aura was a weary, pragmatic gray, like old stone. It was Uraraka, Ida, and Bakugo. They had been waiting for news, and Niza had apparently decided on a controlled disclosure. The sight of his friends, now viewed through this horrific new lens, made Izuku's stomach churn. Uraraka's aura was the first he truly focused on. It was a gentle, beautiful nebula of soft, rose-gold light that pulsed with warmth. It was affection, pure and simple. As she looked at him with her wide, worried brown eyes, brighter sparks of pink and white, concern and friendship, flashed within it. It was one of the most beautiful things he had ever seen. Reap it, the ring whispered, the desire in its voice sharpening. Her heart is bright. So full of life. Pluck it. The silence that follows will be so peaceful. Izuku recoiled, a physical jolt, as if he touched a live wire. He felt a wave of nausea. The ring wasn't just a nihilistic observer. It was a predator, and his friends, his wonderful, vibrant friends, were its prey. He tore his gaze away from her, only to have it land on Ida. Ida stood ramrod straight, his expression severe with worry. His aura was just as structured as he was. It was a deep, cobalt blue lattice of pure, unwavering order. It was loyalty, principle, and responsibility, all woven into a crystalline, geometric pattern. It was rigid, strong, and brilliant. Brittle, the ring corrected. It longs to be shattered. To end its rigid vigil. Let us help it. One clean break, and then quiet. Izuku felt sick. He felt like a wolf forced to look upon a field of lambs, with a deeper, darker wolf inside him licking its chops. Finally, his eyes met Bakugo's. As always, their gazes locked in a complex challenge. Bakugo's aura was a shocking, violent inferno. It was a bonfire of jagged, uncontrolled crimson and blistering orange. It was pure, unadulterated rage, ambition, and pride, all burning so brightly it almost hurt to look at. It wasn't a gentle nebula or a structured lattice. It was a constant, raging explosion. The ring's voice in his head was almost purring. Ah, the brightest flame. The loudest sound. It burns so hot, it begs to be extinguished. To be reduced to cooling embers and then, finally, to cold ash. Such a satisfying silence it would leave behind. Deku? What the hell is wrong with your face? Bakugo's voice cut through the haze of horror. You look like you're gonna puke. Izuku couldn't speak. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. He could see the very souls of his friends, their beautiful, vibrant inner lives, and the monster fused to his hand wanted to do nothing more than snuff them out like candles. That's enough, Aizawa said, his voice flat. He had clearly been briefed. His tired eyes scanned Izuku, lingering on the ring. You three were brought here to be told that Midoriya manifested a new aspect of his quirk under duress. It's powerful, unstable, and will be kept under observation. Details are on a need-to-know basis. You don't need to know. Just know that he's safe and not to bother him about it. Understood? But Uraraka started, her rosy aura pulsing with concern. Understood, Aizawa repeated, his own gray aura flaring with a flicker of red impatience that looked like a hot coal in a pile of ash. The three of them nodded, albeit reluctantly, and were ushered out. The door clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone once more with his mentor, his principal, and the whispering void in his head. The emotional spectrum, Niza murmured, his beady eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. It seems this artifact doesn't just manipulate the dead. It perceives, and perhaps covets, the emotions of the living. This is a far more dangerous development. All Might finally spoke, his voice filled with a steely resolve that momentarily made his golden aura burn brighter, pushing back the encroaching darkness. We will not let it control him. He looked at Izuku, his eyes pleading. We won't. This is just another hurdle. A more difficult one, yes, but we've faced those before. One for all was a heavy burden, and you learned to carry it. We will teach you to control this. To master it. Or if we can't, to contain it. He was trying so hard. His hope was a weapon he was trying to wield against this new, cosmic despair. The ring whispered its cold truth. He is trying to build a dam with sand against an endless ocean. A noble, foolish, and ultimately finite gesture. The first step, Niza said, his voice bringing the focus back, is secrecy. Absolute secrecy. No one outside this room and Aizawa can know the true nature of this. The world is not ready for a hero who can command the dead. They would brand you a villain before you could even try to explain. The panic, the fear, it would be catastrophic. The burden settled on Izuku's shoulders, heavier than any physical weight. He was isolated. A pariah in the making. He had a power that craved the end of his friends, a secret that separated him from everyone he cared about, and a constant, whispering companion that spoke only of decay and death. I understand, Izuku said, his voice barely audible. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a deep, bone-aching dread. The debriefing concluded. He was cleared to return to his dorm room, with the strict instruction not to engage with anyone about what happened. He was a ghost, haunting the halls of his own life. He walked back alone. He could see the auras of every student he passed. A gaggle of girls from Class 1B radiated a cheerful, light blue energy of camaraderie. A senior from the support course pulsed with a focused, orange light of creativity and frustration. Every person was a unique, vibrant star, a beautiful song of life, and the ring in his head evaluated each one, like a connoisseur of silence assessing which symphony to end first. He finally reached the sanctuary of his room, the All Might-themed bedroom that had always been his shrine, his safe space. He shut the door, the click of the lock sounding like a cell door slamming shut. He stood before the full-length mirror on his closet door. He stared at his reflection. A pale, terrified boy with wide, haunted green eyes stared back. He looked at the ring on his finger, a black hole on his hand. He looked at his own aura, the violent, churning war between the life-affirming emerald of his soul and the soul-devouring black of the ring. He was trapped. A prisoner in his own body, tethered to a cosmic parasite that fed on the very concept of life. His dream had been to be a hero who saved everyone with a smile, just like All Might. How could he do that now? How could he smile when a voice in his head was constantly whispering about the heat death of the universe? How could he save people when the power he now wielded saw their living, breathing souls as something to be harvested? He was alone. Utterly, completely alone with the whispering void. As he stared at his own reflection, the voice spoke one last time, not with desire or commentary, but with the cold, patient certainty of a glacier. All lights fade, Izuku Midoriya. All fires burn out. All songs end. It is the nature of things. A cold pause pregnant with eternity. Only the silence is eternal. We will teach you to appreciate its music. The week following the USJ incident was a suffocating fog of secrets and fear. Izuku Midoriya walked the halls of UAHI like a phantom, the black ring on his finger a constant, cold weight. He avoided his friends, offering mumbled excuses and strained, pathetic smiles that felt like lies on his lips. Every interaction was a new form of torture. Uraraka's bright, concerned aura made the ring thrum with a low, predatory hum. Ida's structured, loyal blue felt like a judgment on the chaos roiling within him, and Bakugo's explosive crimson rage was a constant, screaming beacon that the whispering void in his head found endlessly fascinating. He barely slept. When he did, his dreams were monochrome nightmares filled with the hollow, whispering voice. It showed him visions of crumbling cities, of stars winking out one by one, of the slow, inexorable decay of all things. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the ring feeling like a block of ice against his skin, the voices' nihilistic lullabies still echoing in his mind. One for all felt distant, a memory of a simpler, purer power. He tried to summon it once, in the privacy of his room. He focused, clenched his fist, and felt the familiar, life-affirming energy begin to well up within him. But it was like trying to light a match in a vacuum. The black ring seemed to smother the feeling, its own cold, dead energy acting as an absolute dampener. The green sparks that should have danced across his skin sputtered and died before they could even form. The two powers were anathema to each other. One was the culmination of lives lived, a sacred torch passed down. The other was the cold, final end of all life. And they were both trapped in him. Finally, the summons he had been dreading arrived. Aizawa-sensei had called for him. The meeting point was not a classroom or a debriefing room, but Gym Gamma, the vast industrial space affectionately nicknamed the training dish. It was a cavernous dome filled with concrete pillars, steel girders, and an air of brutal pragmatism, much like the man who had called him there. Izuku walked into the gym, the heavy metal doors groaning shut behind him. Aizawa stood in the center of the massive space, looking small and isolated. His usual black jumpsuit was immaculate, his capture weapon was wrapped loosely around his neck, and his tired eyes were fixed on Izuku, sharp and analytical. His aura, the familiar, pragmatic gray of weathered stone, held a new, deeper shade today, a color like wet slate that spoke of grim duty. Midoriya, Aizawa began, his voice flat, echoing slightly in the vastness of the gym. Nizu and all might have given me the sanitized version of your situation. You've manifested a new power. It's dangerous, unpredictable, and has a superficial resemblance to necromancy. For the purposes of your file, we are officially classifying it as a secondary aspect of your energy stockpiling quirk, with ectoplasmic and mind-affecting properties. A mouthful of nonsense, but it keeps the bureaucrats happy. Izuku swallowed, nodding mutely. I don't care what we call it, Aizawa continued, his gaze dropping to Izuku's right hand, which he was subconsciously hiding behind his back. I care about what it does, and what you can do with it. As your homeroom teacher, it is my job to ensure you are not a danger to yourself or others. And right now, you are the single greatest danger on this campus. The words were blunt, unsparing, and utterly true. Izuku flinched but didn't deny them. So, today, we train, Aizawa stated. We are going to find out what this power is. Its rules, its limits, and most importantly, if it can be controlled. We are going to treat it like any other quirk. You are going to try to master it. The ring in his mind stirred, offering a cold, derisive thought. Mastery. A fragile concept. One cannot master the tide. One can only be swept away by it. I don't know how, Izuku confessed, his voice small. The only time it worked. I wasn't trying. I was just scared. Then we'll start with the basics, Aizawa said, ignoring his uncertainty. He gestured to the open space. The file I was given mentions an artifact. A ring. It suggests the power might be similar to other projection-based abilities. So, project something. Make a construct. A simple shape. A wall, a fist, anything. Focus your will. It's how Green Lantern used to do it in the pre-quirk American comics. Izuku stared at his teacher. A comic book reference was the last thing he expected. It was such a normal, almost childish suggestion in the face of this cosmic horror. But it was a starting point. He raised his right hand, the black ring feeling like a lead weight. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind of the whispers of the fear. He remembered the stories of heroes creating shields of pure energy, of swords of light. He focused on the most heroic image he could conjure, All Might's shield-like fists. He pictured a fist. A big, powerful fist made of solid energy, a symbol of protection and strength. He pushed his will into the ring, pouring all his desperate desire to be a hero into the command. Form, protect. Be a shield. Nothing happened. The ring remained inert, a cold, dead weight on his finger. Not a spark, not a wisp of smoke. He might as well have been trying to move a mountain by yelling at it. I can't, he stammered, his arm dropping. It's not working. It seeks a different truth, the ring whispered, a hint of what might have been amusement in its dead voice. It does not build. It does not protect. Such concepts are meaningless. They are temporary lies. Don't say can't. Aizawa's voice was sharp. You're not focusing. Your mind is a mess. I can see it on your face. You're scared of the power. You're fighting yourself before you even begin. Clear your head and try again. A simple cube. The most basic shape. Izuku took another shaky breath. He held out his hand and pictured a cube of black energy. He tried to force it, to will it into existence. He strained, sweat beading on his forehead. A faint wisp of black smoke, no bigger than a puff from a snuffed candle, leaked from the ring and immediately dissipated. It was pathetic. He slumped, defeated. It's useless. I can't make it do anything heroic. Aizawa was silent for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Maybe that's the problem, he said finally, his voice thoughtful. You're trying to force it to be something it's not. You're trying to use a hammer as a screwdriver. Every quirk has a nature, a core concept. Bakugo's is explosive. Todoroki's is thermal. Yours, what is the core concept of this power, Midoriya? Izuku thought back to the USJ. To the whispers? To the nightmares? The answer was immediate, and it terrified him. Death, he whispered. Endings. Decay. Aizawa nodded slowly, as if Izuku had just confirmed a grim hypothesis. All right. Then stop trying to make a fist. Stop trying to build. Try to use its nature. Don't create something. End something. End something? Izuku asked, confused. What do you mean? Your mind, Aizawa said, tapping his own temple. It's all about intent. Don't picture a wall. Picture a wall that is already collapsing. Don't picture a tree. Picture a petrified one. Use the language the power understands. The idea was repulsive. To think like the ring? To embrace the very concepts that were haunting him? It felt like a surrender. But he looked at Aizawa's serious expression, at the grim determination in his aura, and he knew he had to try. This was his only path forward. He raised his hand again. This time, he didn't fight the coldness from the ring. He let it seep into his thoughts. He cleared his mind of heroes and shields. Instead, he pictured a wall. Not a new one, but an old one. He pictured crumbling bricks, mortar turning to sand, gravity pulling it relentlessly down. He pictured ruin. He pictured an ending. Crumble, he whispered, the word feeling alien on his tongue. The effect was instantaneous. A torrent of black, smoky energy erupted from the ring. It wasn't a gentle wisp, it was a flood. The energy swirled and solidified in the air before him, not into a neat, solid wall, but into a perfect, three-dimensional construct of what he had imagined. It was a 10-foot section of a wall in the midst of utter collapse. Bricks were suspended mid-tumble, cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and dust and mortar seemed to be frozen in the act of falling. It was a snapshot of destruction, rendered in solid shadow. It held its impossible shape for a few seconds, a monument to entropy, before dissolving back into harmless smoke. Izuku stared, his heart pounding. It had worked. It was horrifying, but it had worked. Yes, the ring seemed to sigh in his mind. That is the truth. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of his surprise. I see. So that's the trick. It doesn't create. It manifests concepts of finality. He rubbed his chin, his mind clearly working at a rapid pace. Let's try something else. A bit more complex. Picture something that was once alive. Izuku hesitated. This felt like a dangerous step, a deeper descent into the ring's logic. But he pushed the fear down. He closed his eyes and thought of a tree. Not the vibrant, green trees of the UA campus, but an ancient, dead one. He imagined gnarled, leafless branches reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers. He pictured bark peeling away to reveal dead wood, roots dried and withered. He focused on the absolute absence of life. He opened his eyes and pushed the thought forward. A larger construct than the wall burst from the ring. A massive, spectral tree of black energy grew from the floor. It was a perfect, horrifying replica of his thought. It had no leaves, no hint of sap or life. It was the very icon of death, and it towered over him, casting a chilling, lightless shadow. Incredible, Aizawa breathed, his voice a low whisper. The detail. The power output is immense. Izuku stared up at his creation, a wave of revulsion and awe washing over him. He had made this monument to desolation. He let his concentration lapse, and the dead tree dissolved, leaving only the sterile air of the gym behind. Okay, Aizawa said, his voice regaining its usual sharp edge. We have the how. Now we test the what for. It's one thing to make spooky sculptures. It's another to see if this power has any practical application in a fight. If it can't be used to save people, then it's just a liability. He whistled sharply, a high, piercing sound. On the other side of the gym, a section of the wall slid open, and Cementos walked in. The modern literature teacher, in his hero costume, nodded gravely to Aizawa. His aura was a steady, earthy brown, the color of clay and solid ground. You're sure about this, Aizawa? Cementos asked, his voice a deep rumble. His control seems nascent. That's why we're here, Aizawa replied. Don't hold back. Midoriya needs to understand what he's up against. Cementos sighed, then turned his gaze to Izuku. Midoriya. Your teacher wants a live-fire exercise. I will create constructs for you to deal with. Do not hesitate. I will not. With that, he touched the floor. The concrete groaned and shifted. Massive walls of gray cement erupted from the ground, racing towards Izuku like stone tidal waves. Panic flared in Izuku's chest. His first instinct was to dodge, to summon one for all and leap away. But he knew that wasn't the point of this test. He had to face it with the ring. The walls were new, strong, solid. They were a symbol of creation. The ring's power couldn't just smash them. That wasn't its nature. He remembered Aizawa's words, used the language the power understands. He couldn't break the walls. So he had to end them. As the first concrete wave bore down on him, he didn't picture an explosion. He pictured rust. He imagined the rebar deep within the concrete, the skeleton of the wall, beginning to corrode. He pictured it flaking away, weakening, turning to red-brown dust. He envisioned the slow, patient, inexorable victory of oxidation. He thrust his hand forward. Rust, a cloud of black energy, shot through with a sickly reddish-brown hue, billowed from his ring. It didn't slam into the concrete wall. It washed over it, soaking into it like ink into paper. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning crunch, the 10-foot-tall wall of solid cement imploded. It didn't explode outwards. It collapsed in on itself, crumbling into a heap of gray powder and reddish dust, its internal structure having been utterly annihilated. Cementos's solid brown aura flickered with surprise. He hadn't expected that. He slapped his palms on the ground again, and two more walls shot up, flanking Izuku, trying to box him in. The ring was humming now, a low thrum of satisfaction. It enjoyed this. This was its purpose. More, it whispered. All things fall to ruin. Izuku ignored the voice. He had to focus. He couldn't use rust again, that was for metal. This was just stone. What was the end of stone? Erosion. He pictured millennia of wind and rain, of freezing and thawing. He pictured the slow, grinding process that turns mountains into sand. He focused on the concept of being worn down to nothing. He swept his arm in a wide arc. Erode. This time, the black energy that shot from his ring was gritty, like a spectral sandstorm. It blasted against the two charging walls. Instead of a sudden collapse, the walls began to dissolve. Their surfaces pitted and flaked, sand blasting away into nothingness under the assault of the black energy. In seconds, the massive constructs were reduced to fine powder that settled on the gym floor. Izuku was breathing heavily, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer mental and emotional strain. He was channeling concepts that were antithetical to his own heroic spirit. It felt like he was poisoning himself with every construct he created. Impressive, Cementos rumbled, a note of genuine respect in his voice. His power doesn't just destroy. It unmakes. He's learning the vocabulary, Aizawa said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. But he's too stationary. He's a sitting duck. As if on cue, Cementos changed tactics. He didn't send walls. He sent pillars, erupting from the floor like fists, trying to catch Izuku from below. Izuku yelped, leaping back, his hero training kicking in. He dodged one, then another. He was on the defensive. He needed to fight back. He needed to create something that could move, that could attack. But what? A construct of a dead animal? The thought made him feel sick. He couldn't. Not yet. He needed to stop Cementos. To end his assault. How do you end a process? He looked at Cementos, at his hands pressed to the floor, channeling his quirk. The connection was the key. He had to sever it. He needed a concept of finality. Of a sudden stop. He focused on the image of a dead circuit. A switch being flipped. A sudden, total cessation of power. He pointed his ringed hand directly at Cementos. Cease. A thin, razor-sharp beam of pure blackness, more solid than the smoky constructs, shot from the ring. It didn't target Cementos himself, but the patch of floor his hands were on. The beam struck the concrete, and a complex, glowing black version of the ring's symbol seared itself onto the surface. The effect was immediate. The pillar rising beneath Izuku's feet stopped dead, half-formed. Cementos grunted, pushing harder, but the concrete around his hands refused to respond. It was as if his quirk had been completely and utterly nullified in that specific area. What did you do? Cementos asked, lifting his hands from the now inert concrete. I pictured an end to the process, Izuku panted. Like turning something off. A nullification field, Aizawa murmured. He walked over and tapped the glowing black symbol with his boot. It was cold to the touch. Incredibly useful. But limited in scope. The symbol held for another 10 seconds before fading away, the power in the concrete returning. Izuku sank to one knee, exhausted. The mental gymnastics required to think in terms of entropy were draining him far faster than any physical exercise. His head was throbbing with the ring's quiet, insistent praise. It felt vile. That's enough for today, Aizawa said, his voice softer than usual. He looked down at his panting, sweating student. He saw the power, the potential, the sheer, terrifying scale of it, and he saw the toll it was taking on the boy. You've established a baseline. Your power responds to concepts of death, decay, and endings. It is reactive and horrifyingly potent. You've proven it can be used in a combat or support capacity. Izuku looked up, hope flickering in his chest. So, I can be a hero with it? Aizawa's expression was grim. He crouched down, meeting Izuku's gaze. His gray aura seemed to soften slightly, a rare flicker of empathy showing through the pragmatic stone. Midoriya, he said, his voice low and serious. Listen to me very carefully. You just summoned constructs of ruin and decay. You unmade solid structures with a thought, and nullified another person's quirk by imposing the concept of cessation on it. The things you did today were effective. They were powerful. They were even tactical. He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final, crushing verdict. But whatever that power is, Midoriya, it's not heroic. The small flicker of hope in Izuku's chest was extinguished, doused by the cold, hard truth. Aizawa stood up, his expression unreadable again. Your job now is to prove me wrong. He turned and walked away, leaving Izuku kneeling in the center of the vast, empty gym, surrounded by piles of gray dust that were once solid walls. He looked at his right hand, at the silent black ring. It had done everything he had asked of it, once he had learned its terrible language. It was a tool of immense power. A quirk of death. Prove him wrong. The challenge echoed in the silence, a seemingly impossible task. How could he possibly use the power of the end to create a heroic beginning? He didn't have the answer, and as he knelt there, alone with the whispers, he feared he never would. The internship week was supposed to be a reprieve, a chance to learn from a seasoned pro hero and escape the suffocating pressure cooker of UA High. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a carefully orchestrated exile. His chosen mentor was Gran Torino, All Might's own former teacher, a man privy to the secret of One for All. It was the perfect cover story, a special internship to gain control over his unruly quirk. But the real reason was containment. All Might and Nizu wanted him far away from the general populace, under the watchful eye of someone they trusted implicitly, while they tried to figure out what to do with the living paradox he had become. The training with Gran Torino was a strange, disjointed affair. The diminutive, jet-propelled hero was a whirlwind of unpredictable energy, forcing Izuku to master One for All, full cowling with a brutal efficiency that left no room for thought. It was a blessing. While dodging, weaving, and trying to keep up with the yellow blur ricocheting around the filthy apartment, Izuku could almost forget the cold, dead weight on his right hand. He could focus on the crackling green energy of life, the legacy of heroes, and ignore the silent, whispering void that was its antithesis. But the ring was always there. A patient, silent observer. During a moment of rest, as Izuku gasped for breath on the floor, Gran Torino had looked at the ring, his aged face uncharacteristically serious. Tashinori told me about this. Other problem, he'd said, his voice a low grumble. He calls it a curse. Says it speaks to you. Izuku had only been able to nod, too exhausted to speak. Humph. Power is power, Gran Torino had snorted, though his eyes betrayed a deep unease. Doesn't matter if it comes from heaven or hell. What matters is the man who wields it. Don't you forget that, boy. The words were meant to be encouraging, but they only highlighted the terrifying truth. The man wielding it was a terrified teenager who was beginning to understand its horrifying language. The night the city of Hosa burned, Izuku was watching the news, a bowl of half-eaten katsudon forgotten in his lap. Reports of Nomu attacks were flooding the channels. Panic, fire, and chaos painted the screen. His hero instincts screamed at him to go, to help, to do something. Gran Torino had forbidden it, ordering him to stay put. But then came the text message, a single pinprick on a map. A location. It was from Ida. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew what that location meant. He had seen the news reports, cross-referenced the attacks. It was the alley where the pro-hero native had been attacked. It was the hunting ground of the hero killer, Stain. Ida, consumed by a grief-stricken rage over his brother's crippling, had gone seeking vengeance. He was going to get himself killed. I have to go, Izuku said, standing up, his voice trembling with urgency. Gran Torino, who had been watching the same news report, looked at him. You're not a licensed hero. You go out there, you'll be breaking the law. He's my friend, Izuku cried, pulling on his boots, his hands shaking. I can't just sit here and let him die. The word hung in the air between them. Die. The black ring on his finger pulsed, a faint, almost imperceptible thrum of cold energy. It had heard its favorite word. Gran Torino sighed, a long, weary sound. 5 minutes. I'll get my costume. If you're not here when I get back, I'll hunt you down myself. He zipped off, a yellow blur heading for his bedroom. Izuku didn't wait. 5 minutes was a lifetime. He threw open the door and launched himself into the night, One for All, full cowling crackling around him in a desperate, emerald corona. He bounded across rooftops, the burning city a hellish panorama before him. The screams, the sirens, the scent of smoke. It was a symphony of fear, and through his ring's horrific new sense, he could see it all. The sky above Hosa was not black. It was a swirling, chaotic sea of color. Brilliant, panicked reds of fear, ugly, muddy browns of mindless destruction from the Nomu, and pulsing, defiant golds of the pro-heroes trying to hold the line. It was a psychic storm, and it was nauseating. He zeroed in on the location Ida had sent. As he got closer, one particular aura began to shine through the chaos, a beacon of pure, focused emotion that cut through the general panic like a searchlight. It was a blinding, furious magenta. A color of righteous, vengeful rage so pure and so intense it was almost beautiful in its destructive clarity. It was the color of Tenya Ida's soul at that moment, and the ring sang, The whispers, which had been dormant during his physical training, returned with a vengeance. There. That one. A heart so full of light, it screams its presence. It burns with purpose, a noble, foolish, temporary purpose. It wishes for an end. His own or another's. We can grant that wish. Shut up, Izuku gritted out, leaping from one rooftop to the next, pushing himself faster. He landed at the edge of the alley, and the scene that greeted him was ripped from his worst nightmares. The pro-hero native was slumped against a grimy wall, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Ida was on the ground, his ingenium armor scraped and dented, a sword blade pressed against his shoulder, pinning him. And standing over them was the hero killer. Stain was even more terrifying in person than on screen. He was a scarecrow of tattered rags and leather straps, festooned with blades. A long, blood-red scarf-turned mask obscured his face, leaving only his wild, fanatic eyes visible. But it was his aura that stopped Izuku's breath. It was a terrifying, complex thing. A core of solid, unyielding iron gray, the color of absolute, unshakable conviction, was wrapped in a writhing, chaotic sheath of blood red. It was the aura of a zealot, a man whose entire being was dedicated to his gruesome cause. And then there was the taste. Stain licked the blood from the edge of a long, wicked-looking blade. A jolt, like an electric shock, ran through Ida, and he went completely still, paralyzed. You and your brother are fakes, Stain rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. You wear the name of a hero, but you are driven by selfish vengeance. You are the poison in society's veins. You are a cancer that must be cut out. He raised a knife, preparing to deliver the killing blow. Stop! Izuku roared. He didn't have time for a plan. He activated full cowling at 5% and launched himself down the narrow alleyway. Smash! He aimed a punch not at Stain, but at the wall beside him. The impact was a thunderclap in the confined space. Concrete dust and debris exploded outwards, forcing Stain to leap back, shielding his eyes. The momentary distraction was all Izuku needed. Midoriya! Ida choked out, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. Why are you here? Run! This has nothing to do with you. Yes, it does. Izuku shot back, landing between his friend and the villain. Meddling when you're not supposed to is the essence of being a hero. He stood his ground, his small frame a stark contrast to Stain's lanky, menacing one. The emerald lightning of One for All flickered around him. Stain lowered his arm, his fanatical eyes locking onto Izuku. Another one. Another fake, drawn to the fire. He tilted his head, a bird-like, predatory motion. But your eyes are different. They hold true fear. True selflessness. You might have the makings of a true hero. He brandished his blade. Let's see if you bleed like one. The fight was a frantic, desperate blur. Stain was impossibly fast, his movements erratic and unpredictable. He didn't fight like a brawler. He fought like a predator, all feints and lightning-fast strikes, aiming to draw blood. Izuku was on the defensive, his 5% full cowling barely enough to keep up. He dodged a thrown knife that embedded itself in the wall inches from his head. He ducked under a sword swipe that whistled past his ear. This was a real fight. Not a training exercise. Not a brawl with a mindless beast. This was a battle against a killer, and the ring was a constant, maddening presence in his mind. It wasn't just whispering now, it was offering tactical advice. A stream of horrific, cold-blooded strategy. His right leg. He favors it. A construct of rot aimed at the joint would cripple him. His conviction is his strength. End it. The other one, the one called Ida. His rage is a beacon. It makes him reckless. A liability. End him first. Silence the noise. No! Izuku grunted, parrying a knife thrust with his armored gauntlet. I'm here to save them. Both of them. Save? The ring mused, the thought dripping with cold disdain. A temporary delay of the inevitable. There is no saving. There is only the end. You can deliver it swiftly. A clean, quiet resolution, or you can watch this noisy, painful chaos continue. Stain was too good. He feinted high with his sword, and as Izuku moved to block, he dropped low, flicking a small blade from his boot. It sliced across Izuku's calf, a searing line of pain. Izuku gasped, stumbling. "Got you," Stain hissed. He lunged, his freakishly long tongue uncoiling, aiming for the fresh cut. Izuku knew what that meant. If Stain ingested his blood, he would be paralyzed. It would be over. He was out of options. His full cowling wasn't enough. Gran Torino was too far away. He was going to fail. Ida would die. Native would die. And then he would die. He's going to die. That same feeling. The same cold, absolute certainty he'd felt at the USJ. The feeling of an imminent, unavoidable end. It was the key, and it was a temptation. The ring surged with power, a wave of exhilarating, terrifying cold flooding his arm. It showed him the path of least resistance, the most efficient solution. It laid out a plan in his mind clear as day. "Reap them," it commanded, its voice a crescendo of dark desire. "Reap the hero killer." His conviction is strong. A powerful addition. Reap the boy. His rage burns so brightly. A worthy prize. End this conflict. End the noise. End them. It is your purpose. It is your right. The vision was so clear. He could see it. He would raise his hand. A torrent of black energy would erupt from the ring. It would slam into Stain, into Ida, into Native. It would strip the life from them, snuff out their emotional auras like candle flames. Their bodies would go limp. Their bright, noisy lights would be extinguished. And then, silence. A perfect, peaceful quiet in the blood-soaked alley. Victory. The thought was so seductive, so simple. It was the ultimate cheat code Shigaraki had accused him of using. The power to simply declare game over. For a terrifying second, he considered it. He saw Ida's face, contorted in a mask of vengeful fury. He saw Stain's eyes, burning with a madness that would never be quenched by reason or imprisonment. The ring was right. In a way, death would be a resolution. A final, absolute end to their pain and fanaticism. But then, he saw Ida's aura. The blinding magenta of rage. And beneath it, buried deep but still there, was a flicker of brilliant, crystalline blue. The color of loyalty. The color of a boy who loved his brother, who wanted to live up to his family's legacy. It was the color of Tenya Ida, not the avenger, but the friend. And he saw his own reflection in the polished blade of Stain's katana. He saw a boy in a green hero costume, with wide, terrified eyes. He saw the faint, emerald glow of One for All, the legacy of 8 heroes who had given their lives to protect others. To kill them would be to kill himself. To kill the very dream that had sustained him his entire life. "No!" he screamed, the word tearing from his throat, raw and defiant. It was a rejection of the ring's logic, a rejection of the easy, silent path. "I am a hero!" He would not become a reaper. He would not be a monster. But he still had to win. He had to save them. If he couldn't use the ring's power to kill, he would have to use it in a way that affirmed his own path. His mind raced, desperately searching for another way. The ring responded to concepts of the end. But what had he learned with Aizawa? It also responded to what was already ended. Ruin. Decay. Stillness. Death. He couldn't reap the living. But the dead had no life to take. Hosu was a city under siege. People had died. In the streets, in the buildings around them, the quiet, cooling forms of the Noma's victims lay where they had fallen. They were recent, their emotional tethers, the faint, lingering echoes of their lives that the living held for them, were still fresh. The ring could feel them. Dozens of them. Faint, cold spots in the psychic storm. It was a monstrous idea. A taboo beyond measure. To disturb the dead, it was a villain's act. But the alternative was to let his friends die. He made a choice. It was a terrible choice, one that would stain his soul forever. But it was a choice for life. Stain lunged, his tongue extended. Izuku had a split second. He thrust his right hand out, not at Stain, but towards the city beyond the alley. He didn't focus on ending life. He focused on the already dead. He focused on the still, silent forms lying in the rubble. He remembered the command from the USJ, the single, horrible word, rise. It wasn't to scream. It was a choked, desperate prayer to a power he despised. The effect was far greater than it had been at the USJ. The ring, gorged on the ambient emotional chaos of the city, unleashed a torrent of power. A wave of black, smoky energy pulsed out from Izuku, invisible to the naked eye, a psychic shockwave that washed over the surrounding city blocks, and the dead answered. From a nearby street, the body of a businessman, killed by falling debris, began to twitch. Black smoke enveloped him, and he stood up, his suit torn, a glowing white symbol burning in his eyes. From a crushed car, the form of a woman, her life extinguished in an instant, was pulled free by unseen forces. Her broken limbs snapped back into place with wet, cracking sounds, and she rose, her expression blank, her eyes hollow lights. One by one, the recent victims of the Nomu attack were reanimated. Not as people, but as things. Puppets of cold flesh and black energy. Back in the alley, Ida and Stain could only stare in confusion as a low, dragging, shuffling sound began to echo from both ends of the narrow passage. "What is this?" Stain hissed, his fanatical confidence wavering for the first time. More of the Noma's tricks? Then, the first one shambled into view. It was the businessman. He moved with the same jerky, unnatural gait as the villains at the USJ. He wasn't a threat. He was just a body. But behind him came another, and another. Within seconds, both ends of the alley were blocked by a crowd of a dozen silent, shuffling corpses. Their eyes, all glowing with the same dead, white symbol, were fixed on Stain. They were Izuku's grim, new army. Ada stared, his mouth agape, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror caught in his throat. He looked from the shambling dead to the boy in the green hero costume who stood trembling at the center of it all. "Midoriya, what have you done?" Izuku didn't answer. He felt them all, the cold, empty strings connected to his mind. It was 1,000 times worse than before. These weren't villains who had chosen a path of violence. They were innocent people. Civilians. And he had violated their final rest, turning them into a grotesque shield. Bile rose in his throat. This is what it takes to save them, he told himself, his mantra against the encroaching madness. This is what it takes. Abominations, Stain snarled, his revulsion palpable. To defile the dead, you are no hero. You are a plague. He charged, not at Izuku, but at the wall of bodies, intending to carve his way through. It was a fatal mistake. The reanimated corpses were not fighters. They had no skill, no strategy. But they had no fear. No self-preservation. They had only Izuku's desperate, frantic command filtered through the ring. Protect Ida. Stop Stain. They swarmed him. Stain was a master duelist, a whirlwind of blades. He cut one puppet down, then another, their forms falling apart, bleeding black smoke. But they were a tide of unthinking flesh. While he was occupied with one, another would grab his arm. While he stabbed that one, a third would latch onto his leg. They didn't feel pain. They didn't stop. They just kept coming, a relentless, silent wave of bodies. They dragged him down through sheer, unthinking mass. He was buried under a pile of them, their cold hands grabbing, holding, immobilizing him. He roared in fury and disgust, but he was pinned. Now Ida! Izuku screamed, his voice cracking. The paralysis from Stain's quirk was wearing off. Ida, spurred by Izuku's cry, shook his head as if waking from a nightmare. He saw his opening. With a roar of his own, one of rage, confusion, and horror, he activated his engines. Recipro burst. He shot forward, a silver blur, and delivered a devastating kick to the head of the exposed, struggling hero killer. The crack of the impact echoed through the alley, and Stain went limp, knocked unconscious. The fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by the distant sirens and Izuku's ragged, gasping breaths. The cold strings in his mind went slack. The reanimated civilians, their purpose fulfilled, collapsed. The black energy evaporated, and they were once more just still, silent bodies lying in a heap atop the defeated villain. Ida stood over Stain, his chest heaving. He looked at the carnage. At the dead civilians. At the unconscious hero killer. Then, his gaze fell on Izuku. There was no gratitude in his eyes. No relief. Only a deep, profound, and absolute terror. He was looking at his friend, his classmate, but he was seeing a monster, a necromancer who had desecrated the innocent to win a fight. It was at that moment that a new presence arrived. A wave of intense cold washed over the alley, distinct from the ring's dead chill. A massive wall of ice erupted, encasing the pile of bodies and the unconscious Stain, preserving the scene. Shoto Todoroki stood at the entrance to the alley, his left side steaming faintly. He had followed Izuku's own location data. His heterochromatic eyes took in the entire, horrific scene in a single, sweeping glance. He saw the defeated hero killer, the paralyzed native, the terrified Ida, and he saw Izuku Midoriya, standing amidst a pile of desecrated corpses, his right hand glowing with a faint, black aura. He saw the ring. The secret was no longer just All Might's to keep. It was no longer a theoretical danger discussed in a sterile, underground room. It was here, written in blood and sacrilege in a back alley in Hosu. Izuku met Todoroki's shocked gaze, and he felt the last of his strength abandon him. The weight of his choice, the horror of what he had done, came crashing down. He had saved everyone. He had won, but in the process, he had sacrificed a piece of his own soul. He had become something that his friends, the very people he had fought to protect, could now only look at with fear. The immediate aftermath was a blur of calculated chaos. The arrival of more pro-heroes, including Gran Torino and Endeavor, turned the blood-soaked alley into a macabre stage. Izuku, Ida, and Todoroki were swiftly separated and bundled into the back of unmarked police cars, their presence a complication the authorities were desperate to get off the books. No one spoke to Izuku. They gave him a wide berth, their eyes flicking from his face to his right hand and back again, a mixture of fear and revulsion in their professional gazes. He was no longer a heroic student who had stumbled into a dangerous situation. He was the epicenter of an unnatural event, a piece of evidence to be handled with extreme caution. The bodies of the civilians he had used were covered with stark white sheets, a gesture of respect that felt like a sharp, physical blow to Izuku's conscience. He had turned them into weapons, and now others were trying to give them a dignity he had stolen. The ride was silent. Izuku sat hunched in the corner, staring at his hands. The black ring was dormant now, a simple, cold band of shadow on his finger. The whispers were gone, sated by the night's events, leaving behind a profound and terrifying silence in his mind. It was worse than the whispers. It was the quiet of a tomb, a space that had been hollowed out inside him. He was taken not to a hospital or a police station, but back to Uehai, spirited through a series of underground tunnels that spoke of long-held contingency plans. The destination was another of the school's secret, sterile chambers. This one was an interrogation room, though they didn't call it that. It was beige and soundproof, with a one-way mirror gleaming like a dark, judgmental eye on the wall. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence pressing in. He could still see the auras of the people on the other side of the glass, muted by the barrier but still present. He saw the grim, stony gray of Aizawa, the furious, burning gold of All Might in his powered-up form, and the cool, analytical white of Niza. He also saw other colors, unfamiliar ones, belonging to police officials and perhaps a representative from the Hero Public Safety Commission. He was being observed, dissected from a safe distance. Eventually, the door opened and a man he didn't recognize entered. He was a detective, Tsukachi Naomasa, though Izuku didn't know his name. The man's aura was a steady, honest khaki green, the color of truth and unshakable integrity. The ring in Izuku's mind offered a single, dry thought. A simple creature. It cannot consciously lie. This was Tsukachi, All Might's friend on the force. The human lie detector. They were bringing out the heavy artillery. Izuku Midoriya, Tsukachi began, his voice calm and even. He sat opposite Izuku, placing a thin file on the table between them. I'm Detective Tsukachi. I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that alley. No embellishments, no omissions. Just the truth. Izuku's throat was dry. He recounted the events, his voice a monotone, a stark contrast to the terror he felt. He explained receiving Ida's location, his desperate race to the scene, and the initial fight with Stain. When he got to the part about Stain paralyzing him, his voice faltered. He was going to kill Native. Then Ida. I was out of options. And then what happened? Tsukachi prompted gently. Izuku looked down at the black ring. I used my quirk. It was the official story, the flimsy shield they had erected. A new aspect of it. Describe this aspect. Izuku struggled, the lie feeling like ash in his mouth. It creates constructs. It overwhelmed the hero killer. Tsukachi's gaze was steady. His khaki-green aura didn't flicker. Izuku was telling the truth as he understood it, or at least, a version of it. But it wasn't the whole truth. And the civilian casualties in the alley? Tsukachi asked, his voice still level. Our reports say they were victims of the Nomu attack, some from several blocks away. How did they get there? Izuku's breath hitched. This was it. The moment of truth, or the moment of a lie that would damn him forever. He looked at his hands. He thought of Ida's terrified face. He thought of Todoroki's shocked silence. The truth was already out to the people who mattered. Lying now would be a coward's act. I brought them there, he whispered, the confession tearing from him. On the other side of the glass, All Might's golden aura flared violently. Tsukachi leaned forward slightly. You brought them there? How? My power, Izuku said, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. It doesn't just make constructs. It can reanimate the recently deceased. I didn't want to kill Stain. I didn't want to kill anyone. I just needed to stop him. So I called them. I used them as a shield. To hold him down. The silence that followed was absolute. Tsukachi's calm demeanor finally broke. A flicker of disbelief and horror washed through his aura, turning the steady khaki a pale, sickly green. He had not expected this. No one had. He composed himself with a visible effort. You reanimated the bodies of deceased civilians to use as a tool in a fight. He stated it as a fact, letting the sheer, unvarnished horror of the sentence hang in the air. Izuku couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears welling in his eyes and tracing hot paths down his cheeks. The weight of his soul, of the choice he had made, was crushing him. The interrogation was over. They brought Ida in next, then Todoroki. Izuku watched through the one-way mirror, a spectator at his own trial. Ida was ramrod straight, his armor removed, wearing a spare UAGM uniform. His aura, once a blinding magenta of rage, was now a fractured, turbulent mess of deep blue, shot through with veins of terrified gray and guilty purple. He couldn't lie, not to Tsukachi. His account was precise, clinical, and utterly damning. And then he raised his hand. Ida said, his voice clipped and formal, a desperate attempt to maintain control. A dark energy. It felt cold. And then they came. The victims. They moved unnaturally. They had no will of their own. They were his puppets. He used them to swarm the hero killer. It was effective. But it was an act of profound desecration. It was not heroic. He said the last words with a finality that was more damning than any accusation of malice. It was a judgment from a friend. Todoroki was last. His aura was a swirling, conflicted vortex of red and blue, fire and ice. He corroborated the story, his voice a low, steady monotone. But his focus was different. I don't know the specifics of Midoriya's quirk, Todoroki stated, his heterochromatic eyes fixed on the mirror, as if he knew Izuku was watching. But I know what I saw. I saw him faced with a choice, let his friend die, or use a power that obviously terrified him. He chose to save a life, no matter the personal cost. He didn't hurt anyone who wasn't already gone. The morality of his methods is complex. But his intent was unquestionably heroic. Izuku's breath caught. In the face of Ida's righteous terror, Todoroki offered a sliver of understanding. He wasn't condoning the act, but he was defending the actor. It was a lifeline in an ocean of despair, the final verdict from the powers that became down like a hammer. Due to the intervention of All Might and the extreme, classified nature of the situation, they would forego official charges. The official story would be that Endeavor had defeated the hero killer, with the other pros cleaning up the Noma. The 3 students had been present but had not engaged in combat. It was a clean, simple lie to protect the world from a complicated, messy truth. But there was a condition. Izuku Midoriya was to be suspended from all hero activities, effective immediately. He was confined to the UA campus, pending a full psychological evaluation and a threat assessment of his newfound abilities. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner in the safest school in the world. The days that followed were the loneliest of his life. He was moved to a separate, isolated dorm room away from the rest of Class 1A. He was allowed to attend his general education classes, but he was escorted by Aizawa. In hero training, he was a spectator. He was a ghost haunting his own life, and his classmates treated him as such. They didn't mean to be cruel. But they knew something was wrong. They saw the rift that had formed between him, Ida, and Todoroki. They saw the shadows under his eyes, the way he flinched from contact. Whispers followed him down the hall. Auras of confusion, suspicion, and pity swirled around him wherever he went. They were a constant, painful reminder of his isolation. Ida avoided him completely. Whenever they passed in the hall, Ida would stiffen, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his fractured aura pulsing with a guilt and fear that felt like a physical barrier. He couldn't reconcile the friend he admired with the necromancer he had seen in that alley. The ring loved the solitude. In the quiet of his new, sterile room, its influence grew. The whispers returned, no longer tactical, but philosophical, insidious. It praised his actions in Hosu. You see now, it would murmur as he stared at his ceiling late at night. Emotion is a weakness. The blue one's principles, the red one's rage, they led them to ruin. You, with cold, simple logic, found the solution. You used the quiet tools at your disposal to end the noisy conflict. It was the correct, logical path. It began to corrupt his memories, twisting them. It showed him the fight again and again, but this time, it highlighted the efficiency, the clean finality of it. It made him question his own revulsion. Was it just a sentimental, illogical reaction? Was the ring's nihilism a higher form of truth? He started having nightmares. Not of death, but of temptation. One night, the dream was so vivid it felt real. He was standing in a field of soft, green grass under a warm, sunny sky. It was a perfect, peaceful day, and sitting on a picnic blanket in front of him was a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The man had curly, dark green hair, just like his. The ring whispered in his dream mind. You hold an emotional tether to this image. A powerful one. A question. A void in your own history. You want to know him. The one who left. It was his father. The man who had been a ghost his entire life, working overseas, a name on a postcard, a voice on the phone that had grown more and more infrequent until it stopped altogether. Izuku had no real, tangible memories of him, only a deep, aching sense of absence. In the dream, the ring offered him a gift. You have the power. You can give this image form. You can summon him. Not the real man, not his soul. But a construct built from your own emotional tether, a puppet made of your questions and your longing. You can ask him anything. You can finally have an answer. You can fill the void. The temptation was overwhelming. To have a conversation he had longed for his entire life. To ask the question, why did you leave? In the dream, he raised his hand. He focused on the deep, hollow ache in his heart, the tether of a son to an absent father. He felt the cold power of the ring surge. A construct began to form, a perfect, black energy replica of the man on the blanket. But as it took shape, he saw the eyes. They weren't the man's kind eyes. They were hollow sockets, glowing with the dead, white light of the ring's symbol. This wouldn't be his father. It would be a thing, a puppet animated by his own pain, speaking with the ring's cold, dead voice. It would be the ultimate desecration, not of a body, but of his own heart. Izuku woke up with a scream trapped in his throat, his body drenched in cold sweat. He was shaking violently, staring at his right hand in the dim light of his room. The ring was corrupting his very thoughts, weaponizing his deepest griefs and longings against him. It had almost tricked him into using its power not to save a life, but for the most selfish, personal reason imaginable. He was losing. The battle for his soul was being fought in the quiet of his own mind, and he was losing. He wrapped his arms around himself, rocking back and forth, tears of pure terror streaming down his face. He was alone. He was a monster. He was. The door to his room opened. Izuku flinched, expecting Aizawa or a security guard. But the figure standing in the doorway was thin and gaunt, his oversized clothes hanging off his skeletal frame. It was Toshinori Yagi. He didn't speak. He simply walked in, letting the door click softly shut behind him. He looked tired, older than Izuku had ever seen him. His golden aura was dim, flickering like a candle in a storm. He pulled the visitor's chair from the corner and sat down beside Izuku's bed. For a long time, they just sat in silence. Toshinori didn't offer empty platitudes or stern lectures. He just sat there, a silent, steady presence in the dark. It was what Izuku needed more than anything. Not a teacher, not a symbol, but a person. Finally, Toshinori spoke, his voice a low, weary rasp. The first time I used one for all in a real fight. I almost killed the man I was trying to save. Izuku looked up, his tear-filled eyes wide with surprise. It wasn't a villain, Toshinori continued, staring at a fixed point on the far wall, lost in memory. It was a civilian, trapped in a collapsing building. I was young, arrogant, full of power I didn't truly understand. I tried to clear the debris with a single punch. I misjudged the force. The shockwave nearly brought the rest of the building down on top of him. My master, Nana, she had to save us both. She told me later that a great power is a great burden, and that my heart wasn't yet strong enough to bear its weight. He turned his gaze to Izuku, and his sunken eyes were filled with a deep, profound empathy. She was right. I was terrified of the power for months after that. I was afraid to use it, afraid I would break everything I tried to fix. What did you do? Izuku whispered. I learned, Toshinori said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. Nana taught me. She said that power isn't good or evil. It's a tool. A hammer can be used to build a house or to crush a skull. The morality isn't in the hammer, my boy. It's in the hand that swings it. It's in the heart that guides the hand. He looked at Izuku's right hand, at the black ring. His golden aura flared with a soft, warm light, pushing back against the encroaching fear. That thing, he said, his voice firm, is a terrible tool. A power I can't begin to comprehend. And it has been given to a boy with a heart stronger than anyone I have ever known. A boy who threw himself in front of a monster to save a friend, even when he was quirkless. A boy who shattered his own bones again and again to do the right thing. A boy who faced a killer and chose to desecrate the dead rather than take a single living soul. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense, personal whisper. You are not a monster, Izuku Midoriya. You are a hero, burdened with a power that is monstrous. There is a difference. A vital one. The words washed over Izuku, a soothing balm on his wounded spirit. For the first time since Hosu, he didn't feel utterly alone. He wasn't just a variable to be contained or a monster to be feared. He was a person, a student, a successor, who was understood. Your path is harder than mine ever was, Toshinori admitted, his gaze heavy. One for all is a legacy of life. Your other power, it seems to be a legacy of the end. You are standing on a precipice between the two. But you are still standing. You haven't fallen. That, in itself, is a victory. He stood up, his bony hand gently squeezing Izuku's shoulder. Get some rest, my boy. The road ahead is long. But you will not walk it alone. I promise you that. With that, he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Izuku sat in the silence, the warmth of Toshinori's hand still lingering on his shoulder. The whispers of the ring were still there, a cold, faint static in the back of his mind. The weight of his soul was still heavy. The fear had not vanished, but for the first time in a long time, it was joined by something else. A small, fragile, but fiercely defiant spark. Hope. He was not lost. Not yet. The hand that swung the hammer was still his own,